Ever feel like you're surrounded by people, but still kind of on the outside looking in? Like maybe even in a crowd, you feel kind of alone.
Yeah.
You know that feeling.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It's pretty universal, actually.
It is. And you know what? It's something that even big institutions wrestle with,
Uh-huh.
like how to deal with that whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And that's actually what we're going to dive into today, way back in the 1970s.
Okay.
The Mormon Church, which today, by the way, is officially called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Hmm.
They were trying to figure out how to better support their single members
Right.
who maybe were feeling a little bit left out
Yeah, makes sense.
in a culture that really centers around family.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you have this time of like massive social change, right?
Well,
Gender roles shifting, divorce rates on the rise, and the church, I mean, it's always been super focused on traditional families.
right.
So it's not surprising that some folks felt kind of stuck in the middle.
And that is the backdrop for our deep dive today. We are looking at a 1973 article from the Ensign magazine. Now, for those who don't know, the Ensign is a big deal for church members.
That's right.
It's their monthly publication. And this particular article was called Reaching the One.
Okay.
Catchy title.
Yeah.
And the author was someone who, wasn't just some random guy writing an article. This was Elder James E. Faust,
Right.
who at the time was an assistant to the Council of the 12 Apostles,
Wow.
which is a big deal.
That's like one step below the top leadership. So to have somebody of that stature addressing this topic, that's a signal, right? Like they knew, even back then, that the church needed to adapt, had to acknowledge that not everyone fit that ideal mold.
And what I find so interesting is he doesn't beat around the bush. He comes right out and says single adults were feeling like oddballs.
Yeah.
He talks about how loneliness was like this constant thing.
It's true. It's true.
And that really struck me because this wasn't just some theological debate. This was about real people
Right.
feeling isolated in their own community.
It's a good point because it shows how even in a group that's united by faith,
Yeah,
right, you can still have people who feel like they're on the margins.
absolutely.
It wasn't just about being single. It was about belonging, feeling seen for who you are, whether you have a spouse or not.
So how did he want to tackle this whole thing?
Well, he didn't just offer some nice sounding words, right?
Right.
He actually laid out a plan, like a framework for what to do.
Okay.
3 core principles, he called them.
Okay, lay it on me.
So number 1, priesthood direction and correlation.
Okay.
Number 2, individual involvement.
Got it.
And number 3, this one's really interesting, flexibility.
Flexibility, huh? And that's a big deal, right? Because back then in the 70s, I mean, you've got second wave feminism happening. Families are changing.
Exactly, and you can't underestimate that whole context, right?
Right.
Because Faust, he's basically saying, look, this one-size-fits-all thing, it ain't working.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about ditching the church's values either.
Right.
It was more like, how do we live those values in a world that's changing so fast?
Okay, so let's break it down. What did he mean by, what was it, priesthood direction and correlation?
Right. So back then, the church was super hierarchical,
Everything came from the top.
top down, yeah. And Faust wasn't saying get rid of that, but
Yeah.
he was pushing for something more, I don't know, nuanced.
Okay,
Like he wanted local leaders to have some leeway,
makes sense.
take the general principles and then actually apply them to their own congregations.
Because each congregation's a little different.
Exactly.
So it's less about following a recipe and more like, what did you call it? Adaptable guidelines.
Perfect analogy. In the article, he compares it to like a cookbook versus a casserole,
Okay, I kind of see where you're going with this.
You can have all the ingredients, the instructions,
Yeah.
but each person's going to tweak it, right?
Right, you add your own spices, you adjust to what you have on hand.
Exactly. And he said that's how the church should be thinking about single adults, too.
Okay, I like that.
Like, we're not trying to just churn out cookie-cutter solutions here.
Right, right.
Each person's different. Each situation's different.
So it's got to be flexible. And the other thing I thought was really interesting was how he pushed for individual involvement.
Oh, absolutely.
Like he wanted single adults to be the ones driving this thing.
Yes. Not just sitting around waiting to be acted upon.
Right, exactly.
This goes back to that idea of agency, right?
Okay.
Like you, as a single adult, you have something to offer. You have a voice. You have talents.
You're not just waiting for someone to give you permission.
Right. You're an active participant in your own life, in your own faith journey.
So it's about creating a space where single adults feel not just included, but like they actually have some say in what's going on.
Exactly. And that was pretty radical for the time. you know? Like, think about it. This is the 70s. Institutions weren't exactly known for being flexible or empowering.
It's true. And you know what else he suggested that was pretty revolutionary? He said the church should think about doing family home evening groups for single adults.
I know, right? It's almost funny to think about now.
Like, what do you even call it? Single adult home evening.
Right. But even just putting the idea out there that single adults could take something so tied to the traditional family.
Which family home evening, it doesn't get much more traditional family than that.
Exactly. But he was saying, hey, that need for connection, for a sense of belonging, that's universal.
Yeah.
It's not just for families with kids. It's for everyone.
But, you know, I gotta be honest, it's like, not everybody back then was like totally on board with this whole new way of thinking.
Right. It was a different time.
Faust even tells this story about a single woman. She goes to her priesthood leader for advice, you know, and he just tells her flat out, get a husband.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine?
I mean, I can laugh about it now, but it just shows you how deeply ingrained some of those old ideas were.
Totally.
Like being single, that wasn't just your situation. It was like you had a problem that needed fixing.
Exactly. And it wasn't enough to just be a good person. You had to be a good person who was also married.
Right, like you were somehow incomplete without it.
And that's got to be tough, especially coming from your own church leaders, the people you're supposed to be able to turn to.
It's a good reminder that we're all products of our time, right? Even people in positions of authority.
That's true. That's true. So thinking about Faust and his ideas, did they actually stick? Like, did the church actually change?
It's hard to say for sure. You know, it's not like you can trace a direct line from one article to like a whole shift in culture.
Right.
But I think it's safe to say that Faust definitely got people talking, you know.
Started a conversation.
Yeah, he brought this issue out into the open, and he offered some concrete ways to address it.
So maybe more than any specific program or policy, he planted a seed, like you said earlier.
Exactly. He challenged the church to look at single members not as like projects to be fixed, but as whole people.
As individuals.
Right, with their own talents, their own paths.
And that's something that goes way beyond just the Mormon church, right? Like that's relevant for any community, any group.
Absolutely. Whether it's your workplace, your friend group, whatever, recognizing that everyone has value, that's huge.
It really is. And I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up our deep dive into this whole topic.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating look back at a really interesting period.
The 70s, man, what a time.
Right. So much change happening, so many people trying to figure things out.
And, you know, even though we're talking about the Mormon church in the 70s, it feels like those same questions about belonging, about inclusion, those are still so relevant today.
They are. And I think what Faust was getting at, what we can all learn from this, is that it's about constantly asking ourselves, are we really seeing each other? Are we making space for everyone?
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. As always, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. Have you ever felt unseen or unheard? How can we create communities where everyone feels valued and empowered? Head over to our social media pages and share your thoughts because we're all in this together, right? Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.